just as good as I ever could. And when we got through, and like I said, he operated many times. The big one was amputating the end of it and doing the surgery down in the hand, which was done all at one time. The cutting and sewing after that was a minor thing he did in his office, but he did that for months and months. And when we got through, I said to him, Doctor, I don't have any insurance. How much do we owe you? And we'll pay you a little bit as we go. And he said, honey, you owe me $600. And I said, I think we can afford that. My husband, when he comes with me, I'll be able to give the money. So he did. So that was my snake bite.
That worked out just right, Sam.
Yeah, good.
You think it'll be okay?
Yes, ma'am. That was 30 minutes from the time I turned this thing on, and
And she didn't.
Now, I can keep on going now if you want.
well,
And she didn't
got
take a breath while she was at
I
it.
got 30 seconds left.
You know something? When she was a little baby and very young, and her mother insisted that she take the vaccinations at that time, and the doctor reached up and got the needle there and gave her the vaccination, and what it was, he picked up a phonograph needle and she was injected with that instead of the regular needle.
And we put, the cars would get facing each other, we'd all get the same station, turn it wide open, and we'd all get out there and just dance on that basketball court. And then, you know, you graduate and you wonder why your children or grandchildren can't do that. My grandchildren can't. I tried to get Evans to, let's play a playhouse, you know, over here. And he didn't want to do that. But anyway, in '79, Chevron's, Standard Oil sold out to Chevron, and one of the stipulations was that Duval was to move to Naples because they wanted him to be involved in the community. And, you know, Okeechobee was my home. I had stayed there and buried dogs there, and I wanted to die there. And he, after 2 years, or 2.5, almost 3 years, he finally said that he just couldn't take it anymore. He didn't mind going to work because he was planning, but coming home was a bad thing because he don't remember even passing Roy upon Hammock. And so he said, you're going to be, you know, I'm going to have a wreck. So it's coming, just sooner, just been later than what I thought. So I'm moving. So we moved up to Naples in '79, and he purchased the buck plant from Roy Smith on First Avenue South, and later years on, we was met by, my husband was, got to know, who was the man that built Tin City?
I don't know, Kansas City, I don't know.
Okay, well, anyway, he got with him and he told him that he was going to buy property up and down I-75 because I-75 had started and was already to Fort Myers. And he was wanting to know, he wanted some investors and wanted to know if Duval would be interested in it. And Duval said, yes, I would be interested. I would like to do service stations up and down I-75. So he said, well, I'd like to do hotels. So he said, okay, we'll do that. So that's how we got the first, Duval bought 3 spaces, 1 in Fort Myers, or 2 in Fort Myers, right off from 75, and 1 in Bonita. And Bonita, he built first. And before we could build the one in Fort Myers, the guy got in trouble with the one he was building on Pine Ridge Road. And so Duval took that over because he had loaned him money, and of course he couldn't pay it back. And so Duval said, well, we're going to have to finish that one up. So that's how we got into convenience stores. And talking about hindsight, in what year was it, Tim? That the Collier boy got killed?
Oh, I don't know, that was way back there, 19, oh, shucks. That was
1956?
earlier than that, I think. I can't
Anyway,
remember.
the real estate man in Immokalee, and the name was,
Jimmy Ringo,
yeah, Jimmy Ringo. My husband and him hunted together, and he told him about some property and said that, now this is before we moved to Naples, long before we moved to Naples, but we were just getting on our feet good. He said, Duval, you really need to buy some land because sooner or later, you know, Everglades is not going to be able to hold this county. It's going to get bigger and bigger, and it's going to, you're going to have to move with it. He said, you need to buy some property. Got good deals now. In fact, they have a model home in Marco, and they've just opened up, and they're selling in Pine Ridge, and they're selling in Marco, and they have this model home in Marco. Go down there and look at it. You put down $50 a month, you can handle that. So we went and looked at it, and Duval said, what do you think? And of course, I'm not one much for water, and I said, oh my heavens, I don't know. We'll go down there and look at it. So we went down, and of course the model home was absolutely gorgeous, and used to wood houses. And of course, this was a block house, very modern. And so we got in the little Jeep. We went to see the property, and he said, I can show you this one. It's for sale. The price is right. It's close to the beach. And so, okay, to show it to us. So he took us down there, and it was either 2.5 of our 5 acres that we could buy. So anyway, he said you could walk most probably a mile, maybe a half a mile, and it'd be right to the beach. You could just see the beach right there. And I said to my husband, I don't think we need to be here. I said, if we have kids, they'll be tracking the sand in the house, and we're so close to the ocean, the drapes will be dripping with salt. And but he wanted to buy it, so we bought it. After we almost had it paid for, the Collier boy, Miles, got killed in Daytona with a race car, and Jimmy told Ringo, our real estate guy, friend, said, Duke, you know, Miles got killed over there, and you know, it was the will that Mr. Collier had was, you know, was in probate or whatever. It was just about time, you know, that it would be out. But now Miles has died, so it's going to be another 7 years before you can get a clear title. So Diggle said to me, he came home and told me, and I said, well, I never heard of such a thing. When you pay money, the land belongs to you, and you're supposed to own it. And Diggle said, we were young. He said, oh, I don't know, but that's what Jimmy says to me. He says now, Jimmy said, if you don't want it, I'll give you your money back. I won't pay you interest on the month that you were paying, but I'll give you your money back. He said, what do you think I should do? I said, oh my God, we need money right now. Why don't you get the money? So, as I'm saying, foresight's a lot better than hindsight, because today, that is Marco Beach Hotel's parking lot across the street. Sad story, but true.
when did you sell out you were in the oil and gas business here? How long did you all run that?
We moved up here in '79. It must have been the middle of the '80s, or the last of the '80s. Greg Thompson came to Duval and told him that he was going to build a plaza on the parkway. And he, he was, he just didn't quite have the money. And he wanted to see if maybe they wanted to go, he'd go into partnerships with him. And so Duval asked him a lot of questions because he was kind of worried about it there at the time. And Greg assured him that no, everything was fine. And so they built the, because he wanted to have a fish market. So Duval said, well, what I'll do is we'll have 7 units there. We can rent out 6, and I will put a little unit, we'll put a little unit in the middle, and that will, I'll put a service station there, because they need one out here in Golden Gate. They didn't have but one at the time, or maybe 2, and, but they were on 951, none on the Parkway, and so they did that, and the minute that we went in there, Duval tried to rent it because Chevron was going to fly the flag, as they call it, Chevron flag, and so therefore they had kind of told us what they thought it would do. It would, how many customers you could have, and by that time you knew how much you was making off of gas, and so you could just kind of put a schedule to how much for rent, and well, no one wanted to rent it. And of course, I had always worked for Duval, and I never got paid. And so I said to Duval, well, why don't you put something in there? And he said, no, he just didn't have the money, because we hadn't been up here that long. And he said, but I am going to put a service station there. So I kept hearing him say, try to tell him how much the rent was, and I think the rent was like $1,200 a month. And he said, but nobody would rent it. And of course now it's all finished, and you're having to make the mortgage payments, and he hasn't got it leased. And so I kept listening to him, and I said to Duval one night, I said, well, Duval, why couldn't I do that? My girls were, or our girls were in school then, and they was up where you didn't have to really, you know, like babies anymore. They were in middle school or high school, and why couldn't I do that? Well, first of all, he said, I'm in debt up to my head. I don't have the money to back you, and you've never had a business, so you don't know anything about it. I said, what are you talking about? I've kept the books for you all the time. I know how to measure gas, and what else is there to do with it? Well, he didn't have the money. I said, okay. I called a friend of mine, and I told him what was going on. And I said, they had, for another company, they had done how many customers you think we'd have. And I said, so I called the wife, and I said, I want your husband, if you tell my husband, to go out and tell me how many customers he thinks they'll have at that station on the Parkway. And so she said, okay. So she said, no, he won't tell me. Well, I told him about it. He said, oh, you'll never do that. It'll never do that. It was supposed to sell 100,000 gallons in a year, and, or was it, no, 100,000 gallons a year. That don't seem right. But anyway, he said it'll never do that. So I said, okay. So I went to my sister-in-law and I said to her, I need for you to sit down and tell me how much unemployment is and all that good stuff. She said, what are you fixing to do? You can't tell Duval about this. But I would like to do this, but I gotta get it all in order. And I don't know what unemployment is and withholding tax and all that stuff. So she told me. And we sat down and I got it all figured out. I can make this, you know. But it's going to be rough. I can make this. And because I figured out I could only have to hire 2 people. I would do a shift and a half. They would do a shift, and we'd have one that would take alternates. And in the weekend, give us a day off. So anyway, one night I was sitting here, and I heard Duval, he's having to make payments on this place, and it's not rented. I heard him tell this guy, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll bring it down to $900 a month, And the first load, you don't have to pay me until the second load. In other words, you'd always be a load behind. And the guy told him that he would call him on, he'd let him know. So as soon as he hung up, I said, Duval, I want to do that. Duval said, I don't have the money for it. I know to make these payments. I can't do that. I can't support you and do that. Okay, so I called up this friend of mine and I said, I know I can do it. I know I can do it. But I don't have the money. So I want to borrow from you $900 if you don't tell my husband that I borrowed from you, and I'll pay you back. So I said, okay. So he gave me the $900. That night at dinner table, I gave Duval, I said, here, and I gave him $900. He said, what is this for? I said, I just leased your service station up there on the parkway. And I said, I'd like a receipt, please. He said, I can't afford to support you on that. I told you that. I said, you don't have to. There it is. You told me the first load, you said to the man, the first load, you could always be a load behind. I can do it. I'll have enough money to do that. Well, where did you get the money? I said, I don't know. Well, I got the money because I'm not supposed to tell where I got it. He said, you have to tell me where you got this money. So I'm thinking, he's thinking I'm chipping back on him, and I said, well, you're never going to believe who it was, and you'll really have to guess, because to my dying day, I'll never tell you. But they have faith in me, and they had the money to support, and I'm just making all these motions, and they have the means to support me because you don't have faith in me. And so that's how we got our first station. And then they sold it. And the man wanted to up my rent, and by that time the station had moved right down on the corner, and I knew I couldn't make it. And Mr. Briggs had bought it. And so I went to Mr. Briggs and I said, I told him just how I got that station, told him my whole life story. And I said, Mr. Briggs, it says on this contract $1,200 I pay a month, but I don't pay but $900. That's all I pay. I said, I'll bring you, and I'm not smart enough to keep 2 sets of books. I said, I'll bring you my books. I'll show you. I don't make that kind of money. And I said, you know, I'm just making ends meet, hoping it'll pick up. But they was right on the corner. I'm right in the middle of the block. Mine's a little tiny thing. They're half a block, you know. So I said, I just don't know if it's going to work. So Mr. Briggs, he said, well, Miss Evans, come down and talk to me. So I go down to Millionaire Row, the nicest man I could have kissed his feet before I left. He said, well, Miss Evans, I just believe you then, and you can just have it for, although the contract said $1,200, because we never changed it. I just signed that contract, not thinking, you know, Duval's not going to charge me no more than $900. That's what he said, instead of having another contract made up. So Mr. Briggs said, Ms. Evans, I believe you, and I hope you make it. And I did okay. And then Mr. Briggs opened. Well, this man wasn't so nice. And so I went in to tell him my little story like I had, but Mr. Briggs was a multimillionaire. He was Briggs and Stratton. And this guy wasn't that nice. And he said, well, Miss Evans, that's your problem. My problem is paying for this plaza. And I said, well, there's just no way I can make it then. I'll just have to quit. I only had 2 months till my lease was up. And the man made the mistake. He got up out of his chair and he said to me, Mrs. Evans, there's concrete all over. This plaza has concrete all over here. Correct? I said, yes, very, very snotty. Standing up, I'm sitting down, I learned. When somebody stands up, you stand up too. But anyway, he said, yes, that's correct. He said, and you know whose tanks is underneath that ground? I said, yes, sir, I sure do. Evans Oil. He said, and is your husband not Duval Evans? I said, yes, sir, he is. He said, there ain't no thing you could do. And when he said that, that's all he had to say. I got up out of my seat. I said, let me tell you something. Yes, my name is Lois Evans, and yes, my husband does own Evans Oil, and I own Evans Oil, but I got news for you. I told you my life story. This little baby was mine. Evans Oil is my husband's and mine, and I'm going to show you how fast I can get out of here. And Evans Oil will have to worry about it. And that's what I done. I stayed there another month, and I told him, well, I'm gone. I'm gone. He said, what, go? That's what you want to do, go. So I called up a friend, and I said, go get Evan's truck, lift truck, and I gotta get all this stuff out of here because I don't want him to know I'm leaving. Because he thought I was just kidding, because I was paying him for those 2 extra months, right? And I wanted to get out of there. And, because I had my air conditioning there that he hadn't paid for. The rest of the building was paid for. But mine wasn't. I had to put an air conditioner in. And I thought, well, he'll just, give me a hard time with that, so I'll just get out of here before he gives me any hard time. And I could prove it was all mine anyway. I just didn't want to have to do all that. And I got out. And that's when Duval was building Bonita. And he built Bonita, and he had somebody already working up there. And Bonita got in a lot of trouble. Duval was trying to get it to go, and the busiest store in Lee and Collier County, but yet it wasn't making any money. And so Duval said, you gotta go up there and see what's wrong. And so I went up there, and we got that one straightened out, and by that time the one on Time Riches started, and that one was in trouble, so we leased that one up there, and I came down and run this one down here. And then he was diagnosed with cancer 9 years ago, January 1st, and then we went to New York for a month, and he had an operation, and they told us it was all gone, and that was in January, maybe in the summer, and then we came home, and a year later, he had a knot on his neck, and I asked him about it. He said he'd had it. He didn't know when it'd come, and I said, "You're going to the doctor, and we're going now." I picked up the phone, called the doctor, and we went, and he was diagnosed with cancer again, and he had taken chemo before and couldn't take it. And they told him he'd have to go back on chemo, and he said, no. How long will that be, doctor? And he said, nobody can tell you that. But I would say any 6 months, if you take chemo, if you take chemo, or 9 months at the most, and if you don't, a shorter time. And Duval said, well, I'd rather have my family and be with my senses and things for 3 months than I had for 6 months and be as sick as I was in the beginning. And so he said, I don't want to take chemo. So he chose not to take chemo, and we decided that was April, and he was passed away the 8th of June. He didn't even last 3 months. So that's the way the Evanses go. But Naples is home now, so I don't miss Old Choppy anymore, which I did for many, many years. I guess your home is where your children are.
That's right. That's where your heart is.
Yeah, and where you've been the longest and got your deepest roots.
Well, I appreciate the interview, ma'am.
Well, I just hope, like I said, I really got a draw, and I saw him.